Hey everybody, I'm James Gunn. I'm the co-CEO of DC Studios. So as many of you know, DC has been disconnected in film and television for a long time. And it's one of, our jobs, mine and Peter's, is to come in and make sure the DCU is connected in film, television, gaming, and animation. Next is a big movie called The Authority. The Authority is a passion project of mine. It's based on the marvelous Wildstorm characters we are now bringing into the DCU and will interact with all of our primary DCU characters. The Authority are a group of superheroes who think the world is broken and they want to fix it by any means necessary. I think it's a very different look at superheroes.
Welcome to another episode of Shaping the DCU, The Authority. And I'm not gonna lie, did not expect to be in this position for this show to be a thing. Of all the shows we were gonna do, I was not expecting to do it about the Authority. So, let me introduce my co-host today, Tristian. How you doing, man?
Doing good. I am very excited to talk about the Authority.
I know you are. You were like one of the only people, not the only one, but definitely the most excited of my circle, at least, for the Authority. So I'm glad you knew who they were, because I know a lot of people don't, and that's why we're doing this video, honestly, because not a lot of people do. At least not super geeky comic people don't, and so that's fine. We're here to give you at least a lowdown on who they are and what they are, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, let's start it up. All right, so the Authority was announced yesterday, at least our time, as part of the new slate for the DCU going forward, part of Chapter 1, Part 1. We only got a partial part of Chapter 1, so this is shockingly part of that list. Part of again, classically, Authority is not technically DC, it's Wildstorm, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And Wildstorm is now, obviously, they own, DC owns Wildstorm, but for the longest time, they've kind of been separate. And in the past, the last couple of years, they've kind of been integrated here and there. But for the most part, the Authority we're going to be talking about, for the most part, is going to be the classic team, which I believe they will take the most inspiration from. And I think that was the Warren Ellis run. And I believe it was probably the most. This is a team. Quick history. I only heard about because of Wizard Magazine back in the, I don't know if you remember Wizard Magazine. You remember that at all?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Back in the day, they had a list of like top superheroes, and they just so happened to be, they were chosen to be the number one team. I'm like, a superhero team. I'm like, how's that working? Justice League was right under them. So I always had a little beef because I'm like, how do you do that? Because they're like, oh well, they're kind of like the Justice League, but they play dirty. They all play dirty. You know what I mean? Whereas apparently back in the day, they were like, oh, Batman will play dirty, and Aquaman will play dirty, the rest won't. And then you're like, the Authority, they all play dirty. You know what I mean? So, Tristian, break it down.
All right. And not you hating on the Authority, but I mean,
I'm not
can't help it that they're the best.
Just, little beef. That's all. Little beef.
All right. So the Authority got their start in the pages of Stormwatch, and Stormwatch was a Wildstorm comic, and Warren Ellis was brought onto the comic probably around, it was like in like 98 or 99. And what was really great about that is that he kind of was able to refocus the characters, redefine some of the characters. And so one thing he did, so they, Stormwatch, this superhero team. So he came in and introduced 3 new characters, and they became Stormwatch Black. They were like the secret Black Ops team of Stormwatch. So he introduced Jack Hawksmoor, Jenny Sparks, and Swift. So he's writing. I think he wrote like 12 issues, and there was a Wildcats versus Aliens crossover, like the Aliens film franchise. And so the Xenomorphs killed. It's funny that Ellis did this. He pretty much killed off all the original Stormwatch characters, all the ones that he didn't create.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how that series ended. That series ended really tragically by all the characters getting killed, and the only survivors were the Black Ops team: Jenny Sparks, Jack Hawksmoor, and Swift. And Swift's name, I always forget her name.
She's Asian, right?
Yes, it's Shen Lemien, or I'm probably pronouncing that all wrong. But again, she goes by Swift. And let me back up actually. So during his run, he introduces Apollo and the Midnighter. And what was so interesting about it is the weatherman who led Stormwatch, his name was Henry Bendix. He's very important. So y'all remember that name, Henry Bendix. He went insane, and so after his death, you find out that he had this secret Black Ops team, and they were all like references to the Justice League. So of course you had Apollo and Midnighter, who were references to Superman and Batman. You had a or Prestige. We'll use the word Prestige. You had a
Right.
Prestige of like Wonder Woman. You had a Prestige of Green Lantern, of Black Canary. So anyway, Midnighter and Apollo were the last two survivors of this team. They were sent to steal something, this sort of living weapon, and everybody died horribly. So so they've been living underground all these years. They don't realize that Henry Bendix is dead, and so Stormwatch comes across them, these two kind of rogue superhumans. They find out they were created by Henry Bendix, and they're not really sure how to take them because they're like, okay, he has these living weapons running around. He turned out to be a psycho. But long story short, they end up teaming up with Stormwatch and they retire. So that happens. Then the series ends, and Jenny, Jack, and Swift all survive. And the last line is, there has to be someone around to save the world. Like Jenny Sparks is like, Stormwatch is gone. There has to be somebody new that steps up. So
Right.
that spins us off into the Authority in 1999, where the Jenny Sparks, Jack, Swift return, and they've also brought Apollo and the Midnighter out of retirement. So they're now
Okay.
kind of like the new big superhero team because Stormwatch is gone. So it's like somebody has to fill that gap.
That gap. Yep.
And it led to the creation of the Authority. Um, and like you've already said, like they're very violent. They're the more violent version of the
Yeah. Yeah.
Justice League.
Think
Like
the
they will,
boys.
yes, definitely. Like yeah, definitely think the boys. But what was so great? Like I was going back over the first volume, and it was just reading this, and
Hmm.
that cover was like this. This collects the first 12 issues. I think the cover we're showing only collects the first five, but it was just so great seeing that team form. And Authority was actually the comic that got me into comic books. Like
Really?
most people, I thought comics were just for kids. And I remember I was watching a documentary called Comic Book Superheroes Unmasked, and they mentioned the Authority. And they were like, this is definitely a comic book for older people. And so I was like 16, and I went to the library, found a bunch of the paperbacks, trade paperbacks, and I was like, yo, so yeah, that
Wow.
was my introduction to the Authority. I feel like I'm kind of rambling here, but
No,
yeah,
no.
like they're just an amazing team. So let's kind of give them a rundown. Do
Yeah,
you
let's
know of
do it.
like how much do you know about the original members?
I remember most of them. Sometimes I forget like some of their names, but for the most part, I remember. Obviously, Apollo and Midnight are the ones I remember the most
The breakouts,
because those
yeah.
are the most popular members because of obvious reasons,
Hmm.
which we'll get into in a little bit. But I do remember Swift and Engineer, but everyone like I forgot about Hawk. I didn't know Hawksmore's name, and I didn't remember his name.
Yeah.
And even Jenny, what Jenny Sparks? What is it?
Yes.
I forgot about her. So yeah, there's some I remember, some I don't.
Okay, cool. So I'll kind of do a brief rundown of the team. So Jenny Sparks has the ability to control electricity, but we also find out that she's something called a century baby. She's like the living
I,
embodiment she's the spirit of the 20th century.
okay,
And through some of the other series, like I know Planetary was a big um, Wildstorm series. One of the characters in that series, I think, is the mind of the 20th century. So they have various abilities, and her whole thing is she's born when the century begins and dies when it ends.
it's
So,
okay.
but she influences a lot of the events that happens throughout the century. And some of the events, it was even kind of hinted in the series that some of the events of the 20th century were just kind of a direct result to how she was feeling, like where she was emotionally and mentally. So if she was in a bad place, shit in the world just kind of got
Getting
fucked up
crazy.
because
Yeah,
she's the
weird
spirit.
character.
Very
Right.
weird character, but it introduced a very interesting concept, and we'll get to her next incarnation and what role she played in the team later. But like I said, the whole idea of these beings, powerful beings that live for the entire century, and the world reflects what's going on with them. I just thought that was very cool. So yeah, that was Jenny, and then we have Jack Hawksmoor, who is one of the comics described him as an urban empath, which I really loved. I felt like that kind of
Do,
embodied his sort of
I have a question
psyche.
about Hawksmoor.
Yes. Yeah.
Do they ever? Because I don't remember. I don't remember seeing it, but do they ever visually show you his power? Because like you saying like urban empath, I don't even know how to describe people what that even means. So
Yeah.
like, go ahead.
So he's like, especially when they introduce it that way, he's like psychically linked to cities.
Okay.
Like he's I don't know if it's psychically, mystically, but when he was a kid, he was kidnapped by aliens several times. So he was born human, but he's kidnapped by aliens several times, and he was altered. And
Interesting.
so like he connects, like if he's in a city, he's like has a mystical way of traveling from one place to the other within a city. There's one comic where he literally forms like this golem through the from the street and like helps in it. He uses it to like crush someone.
That's cool.
He can track anyone in the cities. Like and it's also his weakness. So for example, I was reading the Midnighter spinoff
Mhm.
series that happened in Wildstorm, and so a character attacks the Authority, and they set off a nuclear bomb in a city, and then they push Jack through a portal into that city because they know he connects with cities like this. So that's going to weaken him. Just kind of give you an idea of how intrinsically he's linked. So that's the best way to weaken him. Go like set off a bomb in a city and then send him to that city because he is
Oh.
gonna it
Oh
completely
yeah.
it incapacitates him. So he can do a lot of weird stuff with that.
So
Um,
weird. That's such a another weird character.
yeah, but I like it because it's very unique. Like you
It
see
is
him
unique.
like running up walls and like blending into like again he can just kind of see through the city's eyes. He can feel everything that goes on in the city in an
That's such
urban
a
environment.
unique, like you said, power.
Yes, very unique power. And then their spaceship, the carrier,
Oh,
it does this weird thing where
it
I don't
doesn't
know
sit
how they
still,
describe
right?
it. Huh?
It doesn't sit still, right? It travels
Yeah, it
constantly.
travels, but like he doesn't because you would think that he would get sick in that kind of environment. But they explain it in the series. I'm trying to remember, like it can emulate urban environments to the point where
Oh,
he's still strong on there.
makes sense.
So I always thought that was interesting. I was like, but he's on this spaceship that travels throughout the multiverse. So how is he not like weakened
Hmm.
all the time? But yeah, they explain in the comic that it can emulate cities. So yeah, that's Jack. Then you have Swift, who is funny because for the longest time I was like, Swift's like her thing is I think she's Tibetan
Yeah, I believe
or
she.
and then
Okay.
she sleeps around. And those are really her only two defining traits for the longest time. And we'll get to later on, we'll get to the arc where she really kind of gets her day in the spotlight. And I was so happy for that. But that was Swift. Like she has claws, has wings, and so there's conflicting origins because there's one comic that says she literally hatched from an egg, like she's a bird, but there's another
Yes,
one that says she's a seedling, which was kind of like Wildstorm's version of mutants or
got it.
metahumans.
Hmm.
So that's Swift. And then there's the Doctor, who I always loved his powers because he's like, I mean, he's pretty much their Doctor Strange, but
Right.
he has the collective powers of like centuries worth of shamans. He can connect with the earth, and his whole thing
Hmm.
is the earth is, the people on earth are his tribe, so he has to protect his tribe. So again, he's the shaman. He can pull his magic from earth, but he also is a drug addict. So like
He's a pothead.
he it's like he has all it's like what if Doctor Strange was a drug addict? Like imagine all the
Yeah.
dangerous situations you could end up in because this all powerful magic sorcerer supreme is
Right.
always high.
Right.
So again, that was kind of his defining trait. He was always getting high.
Right.
And then of course Apollo and the Midnighter, they're pastiches of Batman
And Superman.
and Superman. Um, what's so funny about them? Because like if for those of you who do not know, they're a couple, and it was revealed in the pages of the Authority issue number 8. I want to say, like you
Hmm.
see Apollo's about to go on a dangerous mission. The Midnighter gives him a kiss on the cheek, and that was the big revelation of that they were a couple. But if you go back to the issue they're introduced in Stormwatch, you see them in this abandoned warehouse, and they're naked, like they're nude,
Mm.
and they're talking, and they're getting dressed and getting ready to go on their mission. So I was like, people were so. Like, I remember going back and reading a lot of the articles about how shocked people were that they were a couple, like when that was revealed back in 1999 or the 2000, and I was like, well, he kind of laid the framework for that in Stormwatch, and even in like the first or second issue of the Authority, Jenny's talking to them, and she's like, "You guys don't have real names. You're just the Apollo and Midnighter." And then she makes this joke, "Okay, who wants to be Bert and who wants to be Ernie?" And I was like, "I got
Ah,
you." So he was really letting us know all throughout, like, yeah, they're together, they're together. So that was really funny to like go back and see that he was really laying the groundwork for that revelation. And of course, Midnighter ended up being like the breakout star of the Authority and got several spin-offs and
yeah. Even
stuff
recently,
like that.
or a couple years ago, anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he had his own thing. It's pretty crazy. And Engineer. Did you mention Engineer?
Oh, I didn't mention the engineer. Angela Spica, I think is her real name, and then she's the engineer. Her blood was replaced by liquid metal that has nanites, so she can create like she's the maker. She can create anything. She can duplicate herself. Like
Right.
she's a very powerful member of the Authority.
Awesome. And she looks cool too. She's got like
She
you
looks
said,
very cool.
liquid metal looking type of look. I mean, they look cool like overall.
Yes.
It's a very interesting group, and Midnighter always had that cool vigilante esque look. And what his abilities are like, he can kind of how do you describe it? He can like kind of see what's gonna happen before it happens, right? More or
Yeah,
less.
but in the sense of battle, he's like a I've heard him
Battle,
described as like a battle precog or like
right,
he has a computer in his brain, so he can calculate a million ways to kill you, a million ways to win a fight.
right.
So yeah, and that's always his thing. Like he always boasts about that in battles. Like I've already imagined a million ways to win this fight, million ways to dismember you. But he also has super strength and enhanced speed and agility and all that good stuff.
Right, and he again really cool. As you can see here, and he's the black trench coat. That's the Midnighter. Apollo is like you said, a Superman pastiche, and the name gives it away. You know, he's like the sun god, more or less,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So yeah, again, a very cool team. Did you have like specifically like a storyline that stuck out to you?
So let's see. There's the circle, which is like the first arc that they're introduced. And again, I was kind of skimming it earlier, and Warren Ellis did a really good idea. Did a really good job. Obviously, he had a really good idea with creating this team, but he did a really good job of like establishing. It was cool to read through it and like see them. These, I mean, for the most part, these people don't know each other. Like
Mm-hmm.
Jenny and Jack and Swift were all recruited for the Stormwatch Black Ops team, but then you bring in the Doctor, you bring in Apollo and the Midnighter, and it's like okay, you're really trying to, you're really notice, you're really sorry, you're really seeing this group of people like try to get to know each other, try to work together. Like there's even this scene where Jack was like, you see Midnighter talking to the engineer. Oh yeah, that's the thing. Again, the engineer, she was a new character introduced as well.
Right,
um, you see him talking to her, and Jack makes a joke like, "Oh, look, the Midnight is finally talking to somebody other than Jenny or Apollo." Like, they're all filling each other out. Like, I don't really know you. We saving the world together, bro. But I mean, I don't know if I can trust you yet. So I
right,
think that was my favorite part of that first arc is just seeing them really fill each other out and get to know each other and try to work together. It wasn't just this instant thing like, oh yeah, we're all friends because we're superheroes. It's like, no, we all have our damage. We all have our, we all distrust each other to some degree. Let's try to figure this out. It was just great from that point of view, like that team building that team dynamic. I just love that it wasn't this instant love and trust for one another. It was really just like, okay, we're gonna have to earn each other's respect,
right.
um, and things like that. So I really enjoyed the first arc. Another arc that comes to mind, and this is kind of jumping to Mark Millar's, and I don't know if you remember this one, the one where they battle God,
I vaguely remember that.
and it's not like the Christian God. It's like it's in that world is what people believe to be a Christian God, but it's actually just this really disgusting alien.
Right,
So it was just the fact that they killed God in that, spoilers, they kill God in
right,
the
right.
comic. It was such a Mark Millar thing to do, like having
Really
superheroes.
is.
So like that was great. There's also the under new management story arc where they get taken out brutally and they're replaced. They have these replacements, and their replacements are just horrible people. Like they only like they're I think it was called the G7 team. Like
Mm-hmm.
they replaced the authority members. They put them all in these horrible situations. Like Angela, the engineer, they take all the nanites out of her blood. They give her, they replace it with human blood, but AIDS infected human
Oh,
blood.
what a douche!
She is living with the husband who abuses her. She has horrible children. What did they do to Swift?
I
They made
forget.
Swift they did something very racist with Swift. She was like a maid or something like that. Apollo is being tortured by his replacement. Um, let's see what else. Like everybody has just horrible face. Like they really just treat them like crap. But again, it's that very twisted Mark Millar
Yeah.
sense of humor. So that arc was pretty interesting. Um, I want to. The second arc. I can't really remember. I just know it culminated in the death of Jenny Sparks
I
because
was
the
gonna say,
century was ending.
what isn't there an alternate version of her, like
Yeah. So the
different
what?
universe?
So Jenny passes away, and then Jenny Quantum is born. She's her replacement. That arc was crazy. That was a Mark Millar arc. That arc was crazy because they introduced um parody versions of the Avengers, and they're like, and of course they're horrible people. Like I will never forget the
You
arc.
rarely see that.
Right. I'll never forget. There's that one line by it's the Iron Man
Hmm.
parody, and he's like, they go to a hospital because they're trying to find Jenny Quantum, this replacement for Jenny Sparks. She's the new Sentry baby. You control this baby and raise it. You can control the Sentry.
Correct.
It gives you ultimate power. So they're looking for it, and the Iron Man guy is like, yeah, so I can actually test out these blasters. I want to see how they would affect babies. And he's so serious. He's like, and they do end up blowing up the hospital, that nursery. So yeah, those babies died
Wow.
horrible deaths.
Wow.
Um, luckily,
That,
the doctor got in there and got the baby before they did that. But those poor kids, like,
that's that's crazy thought. And Jenny mostly has electrical powers too, right? She's like
yeah, Jenny Sparks had electrical powers. Jenny Quantum was just like, her powers are just unlimited. She could pretty much bring anything she thought of into being.
oh Jesus. So she's like Dr. Manhattan almost.
Yes, almost like I mean, she really could just do anything. Um, so yeah, that arc is crazy. And then also, and see, this is what it's so Apollo gets sexually assaulted by the Captain America parody in that arc,
Mhm.
and it was just like, really, Millar, you really had to take it there.
You have to
And
go
he
there.
is, and he doesn't just sexually assault Apollo. His whole thing is he is anyone, anybody can
Right.
get it, literally. But I was just like, really, the gay character has to get sexually assaulted? Like that's. But anyway, like that happens. But Midnight is his revenge is funny because at the end of the arc, he uses his laser vision to like burn the lower half of the guy's body,
Hmm.
and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen? And so he paralyzed him. So you see him walk off, and then Midnight shows up with this huge ass jackhammer, and he's like, oh, you want to rape people? You want to sexually assault people? Okay, sir, I got you. And then of course they cut away. So the revenge was sweet, you know.
Midnight was gonna come back hard. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, you had to know if you like you kept them alive, you were gonna pay at some point.
yeah, yeah. So that I mean, yeah, that arc stands out to me because it was just they did a parody of like giant of yeah, Giant Man. Who else? Like again, just the Avengers lineup. They made
Avengers, classic, I guess.
yeah, and then just brought them
So
in and made them horrible people.
what would you want to see like a movie like in like, we're now they're coming to live action. Obviously, you have to basically how do you say consolidate all these stories and like try to make it fit to whatever. We don't even know what the world's really gonna look like. So
Yeah, because it's gonna be interesting. Because like
yeah.
I mentioned Henry Bendix earlier. You know, he created Apollo and the Midnighter. He was the one who recruited um, Jenny Sparks and Jack Hawksmoor and Swift. So I would love to see him introduced. I don't know if I would say I do think he's worse than Lex Luthor or right up there, but I'm like they'll probably already have their Lex Luthor, so it's like I'm really wondering, Joel, like how do you do this story in the main DC universe? Because I feel like again, whilst I mean, and I know that's silly to say because we've seen those characters introduced to the DC universe, but arguably they haven't been that great. I mean, all their
No.
best arcs were in the Wildstorm universe.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
so, and one thing about the carrier, their big ship that they travel through, they travel through the bleed. That's another thing Warren Ellis invented in Stormwatch. He continued
Mhm.
it with the Authority. The idea of the bleed is it being this dimension between parallel universes. So, kind of a big thing about the Authority is that they were always on this sort of multiverse odyssey. They could shift between different worlds. Um, they always stayed near Earth, but again, they did have that capability, and that was supposed to be part of Grant Morrison's arc that he abandoned. It was
The
supposed to be like this
multiversity.
multiversal odyssey, like them traveling to different worlds and saving them. I almost wonder if they'll sort of
Interesting.
integrate that to some extent, just so they're not tied. It's like, yeah, they
To
can
the
pop up in the
DCU.
DC. Yeah, they can pop up in the DCU,
That's
but they're not tied
interesting.
to that one. Because I feel like that would almost be better for them.
Almost.
Um, because I do want to see that conflict with the Justice League,
I do
but
too.
like again, Henry Bendix being right up there with Lex Luthor, I'm like, do we really want another Lex Luthor? Like Lex Luthor is
Mhm.
Lex Luthor, you know? Um,
That's interesting.
I do
That's
want
a
to
very good
see,
point.
I do want to see the original team. I do want to see
Obviously.
the Doctor introduced. I want to see Jenny Sparks. I like that idea of Century Babies. I think they could do a lot with that. Yeah, of course, Apollo and the Midnighter, the Engineer. I could do without. And so here's something interesting that happened in one of the later arcs. Um, and this was after the World's End arc. So I'll kind of give people a breakdown of what happened with World's End and all that stuff. So Wildstorm, its final relaunch before it was absorbed into the main DC universe, they did this arc where like all the heroes fell. The heroes fell. The post-apocalyptic, there was this post-apocalyptic setting. It started with this series called Wildstorm Revelations, and so they took a member of each team and sent them to a post-apocalyptic future, and basically said, "Hey, you have to stop this." All of them fell. So the Midnighter is sent to a future where the carrier, their huge ship, crashes into London and fuses with the city and creates Un-London. And then very people, the Authority members have all
I remember this.
befallen. Yeah, they've all befallen various fates. And so Midnight is told like you have to prevent this future. He fails because again that was the whole point that all these heroes would fail, but some things do change. So in this new and this is the arc I was talking about where I loved that Swift got more shine because in this post-apocalyptic world the technology was unreliable. So naturally Shin being sort of bird-like and having these bird-like powers and having this sort of internal navigation system and being able to communicate with birds and things like that, when they would go out and like these things, they would send out teams to go rescue humans to bring them back to the carrier so they could be protected. She was obviously the best person for that because you couldn't use technology to navigate things and to contact people, but with her senses, she would be sent out. So she really became like the main character during the Authority World's End story arc. Because and then that is so Apollo is this was kind of tragic. Apollo is off world because after there's an explosion that causes the smog to cover the sun, and Apollo obviously needs sunlight, so he has to stay above that. So he has to leave all his team members, and when they do, they only call him down in emergencies because if he stays
Right.
out of the light of the sun, he like withers up and
Oh,
almost dies. So
really?
he and Midnight are separated. Jack, who again draws his power from the city, he really had a tragic fate. Like you see him in a wheelchair, he's all shriveled up because
Yeah, it's
London,
post-apocalyptic. Yeah.
yeah, and the city of London has been destroyed. He's trapped in
Right.
that city, so of course he physically suffers from it.
Right. That's
Um,
crazy.
Angie, the engineer, is stuck in her human form mostly because her nanites, again with technology being so unreliable, she can't always summon the nanites and go into her engineer form. So yeah, that was and then the doctor. I hate that I'm skipping around so much because so at that point, the doctor who I brought up, Jeroen, I think the original doctor's name was,
Mm-hmm.
he had already died during the Authority Revolutions arc. So at this point, we have a new doctor named Habib, and he's missing. Also, Jenny Quantum is missing. So they really like and mind you, the arc a few arcs before this, the Authority they had Jack Hawksmoor had become the president of the United States. So it was that this arc was really about humbling them. It was like how low can we take them? So that's another one of my that's one of my favorite arcs is that we really saw the Authority brought low. But there was a point in me bringing this up, right? Like why did I bring up
We
the
were
World's
talking
End arc?
about how we want to see them adapt in live action.
Yeah, so what was I was gonna tie that to bringing up the Authority World's End. Was I gonna bring up the Doctor? Was I gonna bring up Jenny Quantum? Wow, really lost my train of thought there.
Yeah.
I just got excited talking about that old story arc.
I'm
So
glad you gave me more insight because I was like, all right,
yeah,
cool. You're doing that. That's fine with me. Like,
but yeah, so um I think I was gonna make a point about Century Babies or something like that. But anyway, that was another good. Well, I'll jump to talking about arcs now again because that was a great arc, and then also the Authority Revolutions. by that was written by Ed Brubaker. That
Right.
was really good. It was a 12-issue run.
He's good.
Um, and Henry Bendix, a guy who just haunts his team. He's like the Wildstorm version of Lex Luthor.
Right.
He comes back to life again. Oh no, actually, it was a version of him from an alternate dimension who found out that the version of him that died in Stormwatch, he found out what happened. He's like, oh, okay, well, I can come in and start kind of taking over this world. So you find out for a few arcs, they've been sort of laying the groundwork for him to come back. But the whole thing is he basically breaks up the authority, and this is after Jack Hawksmoor becomes the president of the United States. So at this point, the authority has risen to a whole new level of power. And Bendix basically, this just thought about that. This is another time where Midnighter is taken to the future, or so he thinks, and he meets this future version of Apollo who tells him like, if you don't leave this team, like you're gonna kill Jack, you're gonna go insane. Like that battle with Jack is gonna mess up the computer in your head. You're gonna go
Hmm.
insane. He basically breaks up the authority, and then Jenny Quantum, who was 8 years old at the time, she senses that something's wrong, and so she ages herself up to like 14 or 15, reunites the team. But like between issue 6 and 7, there's like a 3 year jump, and
Hmm.
that's when the original Doctor Jeroen dies, and so then we get Habib. I think that was my point about when the second Doctor is introduced. It was
Right.
in the Authority Revolution, but you find out he was like the previous Doctor was killed.
Hmm.
Habib was activated, and he was actually a suicide bomber. Like he was supposed to be blowing something up right before he became the
Right.
Doctor. So like
Wow.
it changes his whole, being tapped into the entire Earth changes his whole perspective. Then he gets trapped for like 3 years, um, by Henry Bendix, and they figure out that Henry is back, or they're dealing with a different version of him. They all reunite and take him down. But what was so disappointing about that incarnation is that we never really got to see this new Doctor like do his thing. There was a series called The Authority Prime where they battle the new version of Stormwatch, but like there was so I think my point is, especially like with that, with Ed Brubaker's characters that he introduced, and then with what Grant Morrison did a few years later, after like the Ellis run and the Millar run, like there were other arcs in there, but like it's almost like the series kind of lost its magic after that, because it's like it was. I remember there was one arc called there was a character called Jenny Fractal, where Jenny Quantum's evil twin is introduced. That arc was kind of hit or miss. And then you get to Brubaker years later, who really tries to put it back on track, and then it goes off the rails again. And then we got on the rails at World's End, and then absorbed they were absorbed into the DCU after the end of at the end of the World's End story arc. So yeah, saying all that, I need that original team. I think that was my whole point in all this, like recalling all the ups and downs of the heroes, and I'm like, yeah, they were in their golden days
Yeah.
during that Ellis arc, and even arguably during the
Right.
Millar arc, but he still did some weird stuff.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think we should definitely focus on the original team and like seeing those powers, bringing those powers to life for the first time. Like especially like a guy like Coxmore, like and the split with psychic, urban psychic or whatever it was. I really want to see that implemented in live action. Like, what would that
Yes,
look like? That's an awesome thought. The engineer would be great. Swift would be. I mean, they all be great. Seeing the
yes,
way Midnighter sees things, like from his point of view. Apollo's use of his powers, obviously, that's probably the easiest one because I could see Apollo. The others are very like, what does it look like when live action when the Doctor does his thing? You know what I mean? Like stuff like that is like that's what I'm looking forward to. Like that's the stuff I'm looking for, and I can't wait for people to see. You know what I mean?
yeah. I really hope people like the characters and connect with them. Obviously, like Apollo and the Midnighter being a couple is like it's a
Mm,
huge step for representation,
right,
especially because they're not just side characters; they are main characters in the team. They eventually get married. They adopt Jenny Quantum; she's their
right,
daughter. Like
right.
you see them sort of have this full arc, this full life. They have their ups and downs. Like I said in Authority Revolutions, they pretty much get divorced because Midnighter he doesn't just abandon the team; he abandons Apollo and their daughter. Um, So and it's funny because I just know people are gonna be like, "Look at all this woke stuff." Look, it's like, no, Warren Ellis has been
This
doing
is
this since the '90s, late
90s,
'90s, early 2000s.
yeah.
Just like when people were freaking out about Sandman, oh, look at all this woke stuff. I was like, Neil Gaiman was introducing like gay characters and trans characters way back in the
Way back
'90s. Like,
then.
this is
Yeah,
not
this ain't
new.
new. This ain't new, bro.
But people. But I tweeted, I was like, the homophobes are gonna lose their mind, or people who complain about the gay agenda are gonna lose
You just
their
wait,
mind.
because this team specifically is mostly white. If you ever noticed, aside from like
Mhm.
Swift, right? They're gonna race band some of these characters.
Yeah.
It's gonna
Well,
happen. Go
I'm
ahead,
so
no, go
glad
ahead.
you. I got excited. I'm glad you brought that up. So, I need to. I'll send Jawan a picture of this so he can bring this up.
All
He
right.
can like show it when as I mentioned this. But a
Yeah.
few years ago, I don't know if you saw this. Warren Ellis did a miniseries called The Wild Storm, and he reintroduces several of the Wild Storm characters again, including the Authority. Now, Midnighter in that
I don't remember
incarnation
that.
is a black man. The Midnighter is a black man, and then
Bring that up,
Apollo.
Juwan.
Apollo, I can't remember. I don't know what ethnicity Apollo is, but he's not. He's um,
A white
definitely
man.
not white. And
Mhm.
then Jenny Quantum was always Asian, and so it's funny in the Wildstorm, they give her a lot of characteristics of Jenny Sparks, but she's clearly Asian though.
Okay.
But they make her more so like Jenny Sparks than the actual
Then
Quantum we
Jenny
had
Quantum.
in the Wild. And it made sense, I think, because like she was a 14-year-old, so she was a kid most of the time, and then a 14-year-old for like a few arcs before everything went away. So yeah, I think they did that to kind of maybe even to kind of have that diversity, but making her more of a more of a defined character.
Right.
But so yeah, Jenny could be Quantum. I mean, they've already introduced a black Midnighter and a racially ambiguous Apollo. I'll go with that.
That could work.
And then Shin was
It
always
was just called Wildstorm. Is that what it was called?
yeah, the Wildstorm,
The
the Wild,
Wildstorm.
yeah. And it's like there's like four trade paperbacks. I think it was like an 18 issue series. Well, maybe it was like 24 issue series between 18 and 24. So I remember on the covers it would like actually count down like with
I think I
what
remember
issue one,
that.
two, three, four. Yeah.
I need a refresher.
So
Oh
that was a
yes.
very
I remember yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Because they introduced like different versions of the Wildstorm team. Like I know one of the Wildstorm members, Voodoo, she had always been white from my understanding in the the original Wildstorm
In the
universe,
original,
and
yeah.
she was black in the Wildstorm series. So they race bent several characters, but with the Authority, yeah, I do think that we'll get probably racial, like ethnicity wise, we'll probably get something closer to that version of the Authority.
Right. I'm trying to pull it up now. Like I'm looking
Mhm.
for it. It's called The Wild. I see. I do remember. I do remember when they tried to do this, and it was interesting. It didn't last long,
Yeah.
but, but it was interesting. Oh,
But they
there
were
it is.
supposed to do a whole like I know Ellis's plan was his plan was to do like it really was supposed to run longer than that. Like the Authority
Mhm.
was supposed to get their own spinoff. The new
Yeah.
Wildcat team. Michael
Mhm.
Cray had his own spinoff that was supposed to run. Like it really was supposed to be the introduction to a new universe. And yeah, it didn't. I'm guessing it didn't do so well.
I think this is it right here. I'll send it to Juwan. Hold on. But
So yeah,
yeah, I do vaguely remember this. Maybe a mix of the two of these.
I think so. I really do think so. Like that would make the most sense.
I think this is it. Hopefully this is it. But like yeah, I could see that because like I said, we're living in different times, so like you're not gonna get an all white team anymore. I mean, not that you
Mhm.
should, but um, aside from the fact that like we said, Swift was Tibetan, whatever. The others were more or less just white people. So
Mhm.
I do expect to see a
A more
mix
diverse.
in a more diverse lineup going for the live action series. And I wouldn't be surprised if they took elements of the Wildstorm.
Yeah. So
Oh,
yeah, I do think that. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think of that until you brought that up. But yeah, I would like to see that, like the kind of the racial makeup they did with the Wildstorm combined with the some
the
version of the
classic.
original arc. I think that would be really interesting. I'm trying to think the Wildstorm. Oh, another thing they did in the Wildstorm, and they did this at the end of the original World's End arc. Swift actually becomes the new Doctor. So she
Really?
becomes a new because Swift, part of her powers is she was always connected to like the ecosystem of Earth,
Right.
and so the Doctor, like they needed a new version of the Doctor, and they were like, okay, well, she's already kind of tapped into the Earth. Yes, that.
Yeah.
Their version is showing up.
All
Yeah.
right. So I thought so. I'm like, all right, this is cool. So that's
So in that
right there.
version,
Go ahead, break it down.
in that version, Swift, she's in the background with that tattoo on her head. She's the doctor in that version. So no longer does she have like the
That's
wings.
Swift right there. No wings.
Yeah, no wings, no wings. She's the doctor in that
Got it.
version.
So they combined. Okay.
They pretty much combined it. And then of course that's Angie up there. So and then the Wildstorm, I think it's definitely not nanites. I don't think it is, but I was gonna say it's not nanites, but her power still kind of manifests from her. I don't know if she's like always wearing something, if it's like an Iron Man type thing
Okay.
or
So
something, but it's
that's the
definitely not like
engineer.
the engine, but it's definitely not the nanites in her blood anymore.
Got it. And how about
And
the dude in the suit over here on the right?
on the right, oh yeah, that's Jack. That's Jack Hawksworth.
Oh, that's Jack. That's their version of Jack. Okay.
Yeah,
I
that's
probably
their
should have
version of
figured
Jack.
that. He's almost the same thing in classic. He's the guy in the suit.
Yeah. You can't tell, but because he has his mask on, but the Midnighter's a black guy, and then Apollo, as you can see, I don't know if you can tell, but he has darker skin than he ever
I
had in
see
the
that. He's
original.
not blonde hair and
Yeah,
pale.
yeah,
And Midnighter, they cover his whole face, so you can't tell it's a black guy.
yeah.
Unless you look at his neck really well, but it's hard
Yeah, I
to
was
tell.
gonna say you gotta see it on his. That's funny.
Yeah,
You're gonna see it on his neck there, but
yeah,
so yeah, I do think that we will. I'm glad you mentioned that because I do think we will get that, like as far as how they look and ethnicity
right.
wise.
Probably a mix. Like you're right. I agree. I think it'll be like a mix of the two. Um, yeah, I think also the idea of a multiverse, them using the multiverse, that ship, maybe they play an
Hmm.
effect. Maybe they're not from the actual DC current like main universe, and they pop in and try to like do their thing, and then that it
Hmm.
will conflict with the actual heroes.
Yes.
I mean, that'd be interesting. It really would.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to, again, we can kind of, because I could even see something like one of their villains, like the easiest way to do that, obviously, is like one of their villains comes into the main DC universe and the DC heroes try to handle it their way. And they're like,
Yeah,
no, y'all.
yeah.
With
This is
with
our
this
world.
person,
This is
yeah.
how exactly.
With authority can be like, no, y'all. This we got to put hands and feet on this villain. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can see the Justice League be like, no, we're gonna beat him up, but we're gonna put him in jail. And
Yeah,
authority
we're
like,
gonna
nah, no,
lock
no,
them
no.
up.
We gotta
No,
break some bones. We gotta,
right. This person can break out and do it again. Like, what's the whole
yeah,
conflict? It'll be an interesting dynamic of disciplines and like views, and there'll be a great
yes.
argument behind it. So yeah, that's interesting. I forgot about the whole multiverse aspect of the ship and shit. So that could work out. I mean, all right, all right. I mean, that is insane. So anything else you'd like to see from like the live in terms of live action for the Authority, or like characters you'd like to see them possibly interact with?
I definitely want to see Apollo and Midnighter interacting with Batman and
Man,
Superman
Superman,
because
yeah,
I just feel like
that's classic.
it's gonna be so awkward for Batman and Superman. So definitely want to see those two interact. And I really want to see, especially Midnight interacting with Batman and him being like, okay, so the Midnight being like, okay, so this guy, the Joker, he's been giving you hell for all these years. He's killed people,
Yes,
and he's running around like right now, as in still breathing, still alive. I could just see Midnight being like, oh, okay, sir, we no, where I come from, we don't do that.
yeah.
We
There'll
kill them.
be no Joker where I'm from. Like that's interesting. I do like that. But you know what? It was a good show. I mean, we got everything we needed to get out. Did you want to say anything else about the Authority before close it out?
No, just that I'm very excited to see them. I can't wait to see if this like again an amalgamation of like the original Authority that Warren Ellis created and then kind of the relaunch he did a couple years ago. And, I really wonder because I mean, surely if we're introducing the Authority, then doesn't that kind of leave things open to possibly introduce more Wildstorm characters and integrate them into the DC universe? So like Grifter, he was a really big character.
Yeah,
A lot of
Wildcats.
the
He,
Wildcats character, yeah.
and that's another character that they used a lot in just once they came over to DC, they like isolated Grifter. He was
Yes. Yeah,
everywhere.
Grifter and it's arguably Grifter and Midnighter have really been the only two who've like found their footing in
Right.
the main DC comic book universe. Midnighter it teamed up a bunch of times with Grayson, and so like I think
Yes,
that also helped bring a
I
lot of
remember
people.
that. Yep.
Yeah, he got his own, and the Midnighter had his own spinoff in the DC Comics universe, and I think Grifter did as well.
He did a little bit.
So
He was
I
very
do.
big during the New 52.
Yeah. Know what? Do you think they'll try to introduce? 'Cause I mean, they did it several times in the comics, where like the makeup the authority would change. I remember at one point, and this was during the World's End arc as things were wrapping up for the Wildstorm universe at large. They did a story arc where like members of the authority became Wildcats, and members of the Wildcats became the
Became
authority.
authority, yeah.
And it makes me think, like, do you think we could see Grifter as a member of the authority, like, or
Oh,
something like
that's
that?
interesting. I never thought of that. I mean, maybe I don't know. I don't know what the plans are for the Wildcats if they're ever going to bring in the Wildcats. Considering we didn't expect them to bring in the Authority, I wouldn't count on that. Or Gen 13, like, fuck, bro, these. There's a lot of Wildstorm to be mined from, so I'm not
Yes.
sure how much of it we're gonna get. Because maybe the Authority come from an alternate universe that is Wildstorm. We don't know
Yes, you're right.
necessarily.
You're right.
You know,
That would be great. And it'd be cool if they use this kind of like introduction to the characters, and then they're like, okay, let's go back to their universe, and then
right?
from there they start to kind of expand out. That would actually be really
That would
cool.
be interesting. It's almost like a backdoor to an alternate
Yeah,
universe, which is like an Elseworld technically, right? Because it's not part of the
yeah,
DC universe per se. That would be interesting. But overall, I think to answer your question, it's not out of the realm of possibility that we do see Grifter and the Wildcats, or maybe any other Wildstorm characters. I'd like to see it because honestly, those characters really haven't got a lot of shine, and when they do, it kind of always falls wayside. I think where Wildcats are trying to do it again. I think they have a current book out now.
yeah. They do.
Just they do, right. So yeah, that's what I mean. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of try to push it, especially if Authority, this movie, is good and it gets eyes on it. It definitely would not be surprised at all. So anyway, Tristan, this has been great. You
Yes.
were very, very informative. Thank you for being on the show because honestly, no one else probably could have done what you just did today.
I'm happy to be here. And yeah, again, I was telling somebody, I'm not gonna shut the fuck up about this until this movie comes out. Like, I'm not going to shut up about the authority. You see, I pulled out all my comics. I was like, let me
Yeah,
start going
I
through
was
these
scared.
again. Right? I was like, let me thumb through these. Like, I'm just so excited for this step for the DC universe. And I think it's funny. I think that because people are starting to like these ultra violent superhero movies. I think if nothing else, that'll be the authority's lane within the DCU universe. So I'm glad that they're kind of going to get in my mind, they're getting kind of a clearly established pathway. Like, here's our ultra violent team, and again,
Right,
how can we have them rub up against our teams with a little more morals, a little more restraint?
right.
So
The
I'm just
morals.
excited to see how this plays out.
Absolutely, and I can't either. Again, we're living in a world now that we're getting stuff I never thought we'd see in live action, and this was the most shocking thing of the announcement, honestly, for me. So, wow, what times we live in.
Right? What a time to be alive.
What a time we live indeed, especially if you're a geek. During this time period, DC Marvel, it's the golden age, man. It's great. It's great. Anyway, it's been great. Thanks again. Definitely, comment, subscribe, come back for the next one. I haven't really
Yes.
decided what the next one is yet, but we do have more coming on the way. And we have old ones. We have a Batman one out now, a Superman one out, and a Wonder Woman one out currently. So go watch those, and hopefully we'll have others for you soon. So aside from that, peace out, guys.
All right, y'all. Take care.